Okay, so quick tutorial on how to write what I would like to call passable music. So you start off with your chord progression, right? You choose your key signature, you give it a title, you choose your instruments. And now you can see here, I'm writing out these chords. Now, it's not like you're gonna write out the chords on the first try. It's gonna take a couple of tries. You see the third and fourth chord have more than 3 notes. So the first two are triad chords. And you can see here I'm trying to take out the 5th in the 2nd chord, kind of messing around with that. I added an 11th in the 4th chord. But then eventually I'm going to end up with 2 triads and then 2 7th chords. So this is in G minor, right? 2 flats. So the final chord progression will be 4 chords. It'll be G flat minor and then the 4 chord of G flat minor and then the 1-7 chord and then the 5-7 chord. So now you can see here, I've copied it, I've pasted it over, right? And now I'm gonna try and expand it onto these other instruments. So I expanded it onto 4 strings, and now I'm playing around with which instruments would it fit best on, right? So it's good if you fit it onto 2 instruments, but on the cello and the bass, it was too low. So I put it up here onto these 3 lower strings, viola, violin, and contrabass. And then in this 4th measure here, I've dropped down on a half note, right? So there's some movement. And so I'm just working with how can I make this a little bit more interesting. Now on the top, you can see here, I'm adding in all the chords. So G minor, F minor, G minor 7, and then D minor 7. And then of course the chords just repeat themselves with slight variations, right? So now I'm on the French horn line and I'm adding in how can I work some movement into these chords. So this is nothing like a melody, right? This is just a small amount of movement to make it a little more interesting. So you have chord and then, you have a moving note there, right? So it just adds a little bit to the reader. I have that in a forte volume right now, and I have the chords in the mezzo piano so that I can hear what I'm working on. I'll probably change those volumes later. And then I just took the bass line and I added it onto the lower horn part, right? And so you can see in these latter 4 chords, I'm starting to try and ascend up this scale, and then I have those 4 notes running up in 8th notes, and then that 2nd note in the 2nd measure coming back down. So I'm adding in all these runs, and this is just adding a little bit of texture to the music. Again, no melodies. We're just working with the chords. How can we make the chords as interesting as possible? We want the listener to be engaged and to be hearing things that are recognizable, but also things that are new. So one of the cool things about music is that you can kind of do whatever you want whenever you feel like it. So I just wrote this line here on the timpani. I thought, maybe it'd be cool if we had this little repeating timpani line, right? So wrote that out. I have a half note, dotted quarter note, 16th notes, and then these triplets here in every other measure. And I just repeated that over. Now I'm up in the flute line and I'm creating these runs. Flute, best instrument for these runs because it's really high pitched, right? So you can hear it over the other instruments, but it doesn't crowd them out. It's not like the oboe. And so I made these 2 runs, I repeated them, and then I took the 2nd run on the repeated measures and I raised it up a little bit, right? So we actually have a progression here, and it's not just the same thing twice in a row. Same idea, but I added in a progression. Now I'm over on the oboe, and this oboe line is working with the flute runs, right? So as you can see, they're kind of connected and they have a counter to each other. So when the flute goes up to the whole note, now the oboe has moving notes. When the flute has moving notes, the oboe's on the whole note. And so I've copied the flute line down to the clarinet. It's a little bit staggered though. So you have this nice flute, da 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 da, and then the clarinet follows straight after, right? So same notes, same progression. And then copied it down a 3rd time onto the bassoon. And so that adds a really nice effect. So you get this sequential. Alright, so down to the trumpet. I'm trying to add in a little bit of movement on the trumpet. Problem with the trumpet is with this ensemble, right? It's a very nice and colorful sounding ensemble, and the trumpet has a very piercing and pitched sound. So working through you can see the dynamics here on the trumpet. We have mezzo piano and pianissimo. Very low dynamics, right? But I'm just trying to add in more movement into this. Also, all of these notes that I'm adding, all these moving lines, if you look closely, they're sticking with the chords. So when a line moves, it moves up to a note that's in the next chord, right? So like the flute goes up to a D, which is in the second chord. Excellent. Okay, and then now I've added in all these moving lines, and the chord progression, remember, it ends on a 5/7 chord, so I'm just adding in a 1 here, and that should be sufficient. And now I'll give you a sample of what the music will sound like when it's actually played.